ideas and solutions from a data-driven perspective. We focus on conversations about poverty, politics, and the future of our society. Hopefully, you'll learn a few things that might inspire you in your own circles to be part of the solution. Our goal is to imagine the possibilities for a future that is more equitable for everyone. So thanks for joining us today. My name is Leslie. I am joined by Nick and the Futurocracy team. Today, we'll be picking up where we left off from our last conversation about safety and gaslighting within our society. So just to introduce myself, I'm a licensed counselor, a mom, and now a mom-in-law, and an Aikido fanatic.
I'm a history buff, wordsmith, and all-around solutionist. With us for this conversation is the Futurocracy team. Kimberly, producer, strategist, and chef-turned-data scientist. Brian, comic relief and fill-in-the-blank. And Rocky, tech support for the team.
That's us. So welcome everybody to Futurocracy. You can find links to all the data we bring up today on the data resource page on the website, linked to the description. Okay, last time we talked about how politicians and the media spend a lot of time hyping us up about active danger, shootings, car crashes, bank failures, etc. But most people are up against passive danger much more of the time. This is a lurking threat that hasn't arrived yet, and it might not arrive, but it probably will, and it's hard to say when. In particular, lots of us are up against financial precarity. We are just a paycheck or less away from not being able to provide for our very basic needs. This economic precarity, this passive danger, has huge consequences for our physical and mental health. It affects our connections to loved ones and communities, and even literally our IQ. This makes it harder for us to think well and plan ahead, to stay close to family and loved ones, to be able to access even the basics that we need to be okay. And you can imagine this makes it harder for our kids to be okay, and for them to grow up to be able to meet their basic needs. And so the cycle of poverty continues. We did a much deeper dive last time, but basically we left off with a question. What creates barriers to feeling safe and able to access the things in life that bring us joy?
This is what we have covered so far. What it means to have enough money to access one's basic needs and the threats to safety as a result of poverty. Also, various kinds of safety challenges in our society. So what's on our minds today?
So one of the things I've been thinking about from the news lately is that what we need to be able to meet our basic needs and our ability to get it are continuing to diverge for more and more and more people. And that's going to be increasingly an issue on lots of fronts.
Yeah. Just to bring a little data onto that, I was doing a project, and we did some evaluation on the rise of income as adjusted for inflation, and then the rise, how far we've come with inflation, and then we were particularly looking at college costs. So, if I may, from the late 1980s to 2020, and this is the data that we had collected. It does not include to 2023, but from 1987 to 2020, we've had an increase in income by 17.4%. Now, inflation, on the other hand, has increased 127%, while college costs has increased 114%.
So, in effect, college has more or less tracked with inflation. It's gone a little bit over, but not that much. But income is like a fraction, like less than 20%.
It's like flat. It's basically flat, yeah.
Holy moly.
And where do you think the money that's still being there's still growth, there's still productivity, there's still more things being developed and more things being produced over that time. There's still more money going into companies. Where do you think it's been going?
So, to follow up on Kimberly's point, um, she's right. Productivity actually has increased pretty exponentially. I didn't realize that our income over that period was that flat relative to that. I mean, so almost like productivity, inflation, and the rise in the cost of colleges has actually kind of tracked together. What's gotten left out is income growth. I mean, and never
For
mind.
the average individual,
Right,
yes.
And,
right.
I mean,
The
and this is the
CEO,
time where trickle down economics was started to be implemented, or voodoo
yes,
economics, and so we
yes,
actually have some really good data that
yeah,
it has not at all trickled
yeah,
down, and
no,
we are literally just in a puddle of flat wages.
yeah.
And
Well,
while
and
all
from
the
what
one
I understand,
percenters get to dive and swim around in all their gold coins.
and so from what I understand, we've got CEO income has risen. It used to be 20 to 1. I think that's a number from the 70s, and then it increased to like
It,
40
it
or
was
50 to 1
three.
in the 80s, early 90s, and then it just went off the charts. So now we've got it at like anywhere from 1,500 to 1 to like 3,000 to 1.
And that all really blew up in the Clinton administration because they
Yeah.
didn't want to do a cap on
Yeah.
high income earners.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's where the money's going. It's going to the high income earners. It's going to the company doing stock buybacks and the company investing in politicians to regulate whatever they're interested in, so that they can make money more easily. It's like we're having a lot of technical difficulties. Is anyone experiencing the same thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, audience. I seem to be having low bandwidth. I don't know if anyone else.
So, having this enormous disparity creates this financial precarity on a longer scale that has all of these knock-on effects. Like, some of it does roll into active danger. It means that there's more crime, there's more guns, there's more people being terrified and feeling empowered to act out of being terrified. But it also means if we're this close to not being able to make it, we have this hum, and it just lowers safety on every level, sort of
Well,
real and active and passive.
Well, I think, and Leslie, I know you can speak to this, but for me, like what I think about is psychological safety in that stance. Like you are incredibly feeling like you're on the edge, and with that comes a lot of stress. And that manifests in a lot of different ways, including having a short temper with your kids, fighting with your spouse more often, or showing up late to work because you had half a dozen things that you still got to take care of from yesterday because you didn't get to it because you were doing all. It's just kind of all these things create a lot of different stress. Plus, looking at your paycheck, not being able to buy the same thing month to month, and just going down that route. I'm experiencing it. Groceries are more expensive. It's really crazy. But I can't imagine what it would be like with a household and kids depending on you. All I got is a dog.
The other thing that happens is that sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Oh, it was that this was really starting to remind me about right before the French Revolution, where the monarchies were eating cake, and it was hard for the peasant class to even get bread. And we are living in the greatest wealth indisparity in human history.
Yeah. From what I understand, it is worse than that time that you're referring to right
Oh
now.
yeah, like
Yeah.
we are completely complacent when all the upper class are eating caviar and can do whatever
We
they want
idolize.
whenever they want. Yeah.
Yeah, and we tend to idolize them. We could talk all day about, all the reality shows of idolizing the rich, but Leslie, I know you were going to talk about a little bit about the psychological effects of feeling in precarity.
Well, one of the things that happens is when it's not clear to us that we have enough cash to just meet our basic needs, all we can think about are cash. Parenting is not relevant. Maintaining relationships is not relevant. And so there was an interesting study, I think it was during World War II. There were some conscientious objectors were essentially said you can either go to prison or you can participate in this study. And so many of them said, cool, I'll do the scientific study. So what they did is they restricted their calories to, I think, 1,500 a day for several months. And so, as you can imagine, like the men got very, very thin. But on all of their non eating times, they read cookbooks, they imagined about food, they swapped recipes, like all they could think about, all they could talk about, all they organized their time around was food. They couldn't think about exercise. They couldn't think about building relationships outside of connecting with favorite recipes. Like all they could think about was food. And once the study was over, their minds could think about other things when their food wasn't so restricted and precarious. The same thing happens about money.
Yeah.
It sounds like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the other thing that comes to mind is like, and I think this is the thing that we talk about. This is what's in the design that we're describing, is that when you're in that position, Leslie, to me, like your ability to advocate for yourself, to confidently ask for that raise, or say like, no, I'm worth more than that, or like that's not gonna that salary is not going to work for me. When everyone has been lowballing salaries for that long, we are not in a position and in a can you speak a little bit to that?
So it just makes it hard to take any kind of bigger perspective.
Yeah.
If you're not sure you're going to have enough money to feed your family through the end of the week, none of the rest of it is relevant. And so, it's been interesting to me that something is shifting where people are able to think more about demanding being treated better as employees, because generally being that precarious leaves almost no bandwidth for even noticing if there's a community issue that needs attention, or a larger political issue or national issue. It's like, who cares about polar bears? I don't know. I mean, it's not that I don't care, but take a number. So it makes it really hard for people to be active. So it's been interesting to me that there has been bandwidth. And I think part of this is evidence of how pushed to the wall people feel, that they have no choice but to just take on employers and make something shift here, because they're not making it anyway.
Well, and I think it began during COVID too, when people were kind of forced to sit and contemplate for a while, in effect,
For
and
real.
then come back to whatever situation that they were in, or not forced, or forced to overwork themselves in fairly dangerous situations.
It's difficult to focus on the big picture when you are not able to even fill out the little one that you're working with. So if you
Yeah.
are looking for a way to expand your perspective and a way to think about things that matter on a macro level, you still have these micros of your life that you need to be able to maintain. And this was true even before COVID, and even more so, during and after. I mean, it's like the problems have been exacerbated, and it's not easy to really find find an even be even keeled, to have a baseline. That baseline is different for everyone, and when you don't have that emphasis on community and people getting together so they can hash out the problems and and unite for something that is bigger than themselves, then it just leads to, I'd say, a societal myopia, where you're not seeing things clearly, and because you're not able to. You're just not able to. You don't have the ability to do that if your basic needs are not met. That's just out of the question.
Well, and that leads me to just say that, depression levels are off the charts. And especially with certain age groups, it varies, but you'd be surprised. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think to that point, we also need to say that because there's so much of that going on and people being affected by poverty in a way that creates trauma, not just directly from the poverty, but in the ways that it creates chaos within people's lives, and that can create trauma. um Leaning on substances and having substance abuse within the family, which can lead to some other things if the person gets physically violent during that type of situation. All of that comes more often into play when we're talking about poverty. Not to say that people with you know wealthy backgrounds or whatever don't ever have those problems at all. Not at all. Like, there's still all kinds of situations that are like that for all kinds of income groups. But I think what I'm saying is that stress creates an inability to handle any of those situations well, and those situations just happen more often, and we don't have access to mental health. We don't have enough physicians. We don't have enough therapists. We don't have enough people. We don't even have the access to it. Like, most people who are in such precarious places can't get in, can't afford to, or their policies don't cover it. And if they do, like, getting into see a free therapist who's going to do it pro bono, like, there's just not it, like, yeah.
Well, it's also set up in our schools because, like, this counselors in our school system are way understaffed. That
Yeah.
like the local schools in my area are like 900 to 1.
Yeah,
And that's
Same.
that's unsustainable.
that's insane. We had, when I was in high school, there were there were four counselors at our high school, and we had a graduating class of 350.
Wow.
And that was in 2003 when I graduated.
I
So
have
nice.
a friend.
It's only gotten worse since then. Because
Yeah.
my graduating was like 1,700, and there were 3 people at our high school.
Wow.
So one class didn't even
Okay,
have
so
a dedicated
what about the therapist shortage right now, Leslie? Have you noticed that? And the other thing I want to say is that I've noticed a lot of therapy spaces and therapists have gravitated towards big conglomerate companies. There's a lot of overtake of these smaller practices into the bigger companies.
Just like many industries. And part of it is administrating any insurance. You really need multiple staff who are in charge of that. And so or I could take a whole day out of my practice and do insurance administration. I have a friend, we privatized mental health, state and county mental health here. And I have a friend who works in what used to be mental health. So she works with the severely, chronically, mentally ill poor. Her caseload is 130. And often they will double book sessions because sometimes people don't have transportation and can't come. So sometimes she ends up having to do half an hour sessions, but she can't get people in more than once every 6 or 7 weeks. Like, you can't do that with the chronic. Like, if you actually want chronic mental illness to be treated, you can't do it a half an hour every 6 or 8 weeks with an occasional group. Like, but that's literally, there's 2 therapists at what used to be our county mental health system center. And I know I have another colleague in Texas, and she said in the whole county, the soonest there is any therapy appointment in the whole county is 3 months down the road. Like, that's, you might as well just not have it. It's not available.
Well, and that is also a symptom that we're in end stage capitalism, where and what the only way that corporations survive end stage capitalism is a race to monopoly, which is exactly what we're seeing with the privatization of our social services, so then they can be scooped up and taken over and administrated by our corporate overlords.
Yeah,
And so,
which is kind of what they're all of that leads me to like think about what they're telling us. We've got a labor shortage or job short. Like, what is it? Is labor shortage, job shortage? Like, can you make up your mind? And you know, like, who's pulling the strings here?
well, because it's the on the door, on the rolls of the unemployed, they get dropped after 6 weeks. So then
Yeah.
they disappear. And so it looks like we have a labor shortage when we actually have people that are refusing to participate and work for those pathetic wages.
Yeah.
Which absolutely makes sense, because in most like minimum wage jobs is once you have to add in daycare there, it's almost not worth working.
That's what I was just going to say. Like, 2-income households are almost not possible anymore because childcare is so expensive, and often when they do the math, it's just not, it doesn't equal out to
Well, yeah.
having it
Well,
work.
after tax, daycare is anywhere from, depends on how much you use them.
And it depends on the region,
Yeah,
depends on all kinds of things.
800 to 1500 I've seen.
Private, public,
And
all.
and a good, minimum wage job, well, you can make 1500. And so then that's a wash right there.
Yeah.
Well, and here in my state, just last year, rents went up 45%. Incomes didn't go up anything like that. So, what, consequently, no surprise, like, our homelessness population has increased exponentially. Our opioid overdoses and other suicides and deaths of despair are off, like, literally gone up by 100% 1 year because of this. Like,
And I kind of find it fascinating that there's a lot of, like, here in San Diego, I'm in the San Diego area, and there's so much controversy, and there's a lot going on with our county and homelessness laws. And I just am like, why do you guys not get that this is like cause and effect? Like, fix the problem. Don't just make it illegal for homeless people to exist. Like, that's basically what they're doing. And that's not going to work. You can't just.
Right.
Well,
and also the Ninth Circuit Court, which is the Southwest region, actually just ruled that you cannot outlaw urban camping unless you have somewhere for them to go. So if they're trying to
That's what they're
outlaw it,
trying to do.
then they're going to actually be sued to the point where then they're going to have to do something.
Good.
So it's a weird backhanded way of maybe trying to look at the problem. And there are some cities and counties in California that are doing a great job with tiny house communities, which are amazing. Yeah, and the rest of the country will eventually catch up.
Well, one of the biggest issues we have is unfortunately zoning. There's too many communities that feel like not in my community. And so you have too many people who are just essentially passing the buck, and it's statewide. And the way our state is oriented, there's so many states that the cities in some cases have an unusual amount of influence on what the county does, and the counties don't work together very well. And this is even on the the like law enforcement side too. Like there's tons of situations where like the counties don't. It's very often that in many cases, like when people get transferred, the information will fall through the cracks because the counties aren't talking to each other, and so one county doesn't realize that another county has somebody that's supposed to be moved over. It falls through, and somebody who theoretically should have been sent to like in some cases we've had situations with people who should not be getting out, people who aren't even being out or being let out because they aren't talking, and stuff like that is translating over as well to like what you're talking about with zoning, housing. It's a competition of counties versus each other, and even in some cases cities versus each other instead of working together. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a cultural thing or if it's just
Oh,
maybe it's a situation where the society as a whole has become a situation of I just need to swim, forget everybody else drowning. And unfortunately, it's allowing all of us to start sinking.
so
Yeah.
here's the interesting point on that is 60 to 80 years ago, there used to be a dorm style housing situation that was relatively common for young single working people, as they could be very mobile. It was like a barracks kind of situation. And so it was cheap, it was clean, it was regulated. And then, a lot of developers started to push against those because they weren't safe and they wanted them to have sprinklers and, have everything up, which made that kind of cost benefit unattainable. And so municipalities have been legislating against those for the last 60 years, which is where a lot of the young homeless people would have, had a place to stay and had an address and been able to work a job and
Yeah.
and get themselves up and better.
It's interesting you say that because I know those are coming back in New York.
No, I
But
just I
also,
just found out that the airlines have crash pads like that. It's kind of
yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah. But the other thing I want to say is that I think there's a lot of lobbying towards single hand outside of the direct cities, right? Or there's been a lot of, especially here in San Diego, a lot of push towards when you get new housing built to have them be these large single family homes that you can sell for close to $1 million, um, instead of having any kind of high density, low income space. And it's almost like, I find it interesting that every once in a while I'll see because here in California we sometimes have direct bills about some of these bigger real estate deals. Um, and they'll be like they're toting that they're gonna have so and so percent, so and so houses built of high density, low income, and then and 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 I read that and I'm like, that is like 1%. It's like such a small amount that, like, how are they, like, it's really frustrating to me to see this. We have perpetuated this year after year after year, decade after decade.
Yeah,
And
it's tough.
it's very clear that, to me, that a lot of our, even just look people low on the quote political totem pole, who are like advisors to our county supervisors and our city city representatives. I'm saying that wrong. But those folks have been bought by these big
well,
real estate agencies. They're
yeah,
wined and dined and all that jazz.
and I've just been learning about the state treasurers are such an
Mhm.
important thing that, and you may not know about woke or anti-woke investing. And so
Mm.
those are the things that are actually going to cost municipalities and states and counties eventually, can go bankrupt. The last county that did that process did go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Well,
But
and
that
here,
only benefits the upper class, the people with money, the capitalists, the one percenters,
Yeah.
because, you know, when a county goes bankrupt or a city goes bankrupt, what could somebody with money do? You can buy it. And then we're living in company towns again. And we all
Yeah.
remember, we all know how well that went for us.
mhm.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, when it comes down to it, it feels, like you know, it's designed this way. We keep making decisions that lead us to this space, and it's so frustrating to see people just not understand some of it too. Like, to me, it is sometimes that there's and this is what we're here, doing, is trying to provide some information so that people can grasp what's really happening and see the data, so that they can have a real understanding, so y'all can have a real understanding of how this has happened, and where we are with the numbers, and then how we can move forward too. Like, we always want to talk about that.
I also want to throw in this other piece. So not only are sort of our wages, our ability to pay for our basic needs, and the cost of our basic needs diverging, there's this other big thing that is like right on top of us, which is AI, which in some ways has all kinds of possible awesomeness to it. But it also has two really hard things. And one is, I mean, I think I mentioned last time, like Walmart is planning to automate almost half their stores by next year. They're the largest employer in the country. So,
And you know what I heard a rumor about? Are they adding, will you tip the machine to Walmart cash registers?
oh my
I've
goodness.
heard that. And like, yeah,
They don't let
at a
us tip
self-checkout, we
cashiers.
want you to tip.
They don't let us tip cashiers. But, and I know most fast food chains are getting ready to automate drive-throughs. So, like, we really, there are counselors, there are AI counselors have been proven more effective with combat vets. That, so there is no job that is immune. I mean, maybe body workers, but massage therapists, but maybe not. And so
Acupuncturist.
there's going to be way fewer jobs, period. Yes, some people will have to work on the AI, but that is a fraction of the number who are doing the jobs that AI is going to do. And then there's this piece of AI complicating our ability to tell what's real. And we've seen this already in some political ads, but also now there are some reports of people getting phone calls from distraught children saying they need help, they've been kidnapped, and it's AI. So we have this complication that is bearing down on us that we really have no idea how to factor in.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
and I
and
wanted to add to that is just, we all understand that our country is so divided right now. And the little heuristic algorithms of our social media feeds, that's a little AI. And that has helped to, it has divided this country. And that is not a generalist, it's not an intelligence, it's a heuristic that has done this damage to us. And we have let it. And now if you go, well, let's go to the next level and actually give it some intelligence, we will, if it becomes as smart as we are, in the next 30 seconds, it will have evolved another million years. Like, that's a scary thing, that it might look at us like we look at ants.
So I wonder if it makes sense to go ahead, Kimberly.
I was just gonna say, I'm trying to find a link to it, but I'll try to pop it into our links later, of our resources. But what I'm thinking about is some of the testimony that Tristan Harris has done for Congress about, and the organization that he works with around preparing for AI, and some of the oversight that we need in order to mitigate the negative impacts that could be coming our way. And what's interesting to me is that I I I see him doing these things. I see other, like, I think the big Google guy has been doing some of that also, and giving some warnings as well. But what I'm I'm eager to see some action. Like, let's stop interviewing these people. Let's actually like do something. Like, it's just, I am definitely eager to see some action in that area. And what is what I'm fearful of is that we will continue on this path that the economic gains from the adoption of AI into many industries will only be directed towards the top. They will not in any way, shape, or form spread that out to the people who have been working on making all of this possible for all this time. So really, I'm fearful of that. And here's someone bringing up the thing.
That a UBI would be the only way that humans could coexist again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what he means by
Build the
UBI is universal basic income or unconditional basic income, which would allow people to have some or all of their basic needs met by a stipend given by the government.
And
And
so
that could be collected not just from all taxes, but could also be collected from AI tax, an AI tax specifically.
Yeah. And I guess with
Industries.
so many people, oh, go ahead, Brian. Let me go ahead, Nick.
it was just,
It's just-
that would give people the bandwidth to actually start to think and reassess and what they might
Well,
want to do.
I mean, if a bunch of industries are going to basically kind of blow up in a way similar to that of the coal industry and other industries, many decades ago, then what we've got a lot of people who are going to have to reevaluate and figure out what their next steps are and reinvent themselves. And what I want to see is a lot of people who can be entrepreneurs and figure out how they can work for themselves instead of working for big companies.
Nick, were you going to make a point?
Yes, I'm just saying, like, the clouds are already gathering, right? The AI clouds, right? So why not build some? Why not prepare, and build what you need to build. Build the floor so people don't fall through it. And there's been be many industries that are impacted by AI. So build a way so that it's a gradual um, a cushioning for this fall. It's impending for trucking, for, we talked about retail, we talked about all kinds of industries that are, and people work in these industries that are going to be affected. So, instead of waiting until it happens, just prepare now. We're already behind, but that doesn't mean that we can't play catch up, or at least try, make the effort to do it. I know there are pilots that are going on. Hey, does this work? Does this not work? We know that it works. We don't really have time. Hey, let's see what happens. We already know what's going to happen, and we would like
Yeah.
to prevent the Mad Max scenario, and go do something that's going to be a more peaceful transition to other ways of living and life, and finding meaning in our lives. What does
For
mean?
for me, I just don't see us getting to this stage where we can implement UBI or any kind of basic income until we have a shift of the ethics and the integrity within our political system. And so that to me is kind of a first tackle point, and it's a big mountain to climb. Like, that's a huge mountain to climb. And that from that, once we climb that mountain, it's like a hop to UBI in my mind. Like,
Well, I think there is
skip,
a solution
hop, and a
to
joy, like
to
jump
make
for
that
joy.
not so
Easy.
much of a mountain. Is ranked choice voting would not make that would take that mountain and burrow a huge tunnel through it, and we could just pass on through, because what ranked choice voting does is it eliminates these extreme candidates that we're ended up at the general where it's a choice between two wrongs.
Yeah.
Where because actually there's 1%, there's 0.02% of the families in this country which donate enough money to determine who our candidates are in the first place. So they are really setting up our initial false choice.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
if we can get if we can get ranked choice voting in there, then we can actually have candidates that are not owned by the corporations, but are actually representative by the people and not being elected by 16%, but they can't be elected unless they get 51% of the vote. Wow, that sounds like a representative democracy, unlike what we've been living in so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brian's bringing us up a perfect point.
Really good point. I wanna redirect our conversation though. I think Leslie has in mind some other points she wants to make.
Well, some of what's happening, we're sort of been told that AI isn't so much a threat to how we're setting up. I mean, it sort of goes back to we have a labor shortage. Why should AI be a problem? And so we kind of can't talk about safety without talking about gaslighting. And this was the word of the year, by the way. So Robin Stern wrote this book called The Gaslight Effect. And she defines gaslighting as the act of undermining another person's reality by denying facts or the environment around them or their feelings. So,
like alternative facts?
Like alternative facts. So, as a little side note, there was a play in the 30s called Gaslighting, which then became a movie. Jimmy Stewart was in it. So a husband keeps lowering the intensity of the gas lights, which is what people had on the wall to see in their homes. And then he denies that it's happening, and it makes his wife crazy. So he can go off and do what he wants. So that's how we got the name gaslighting. So I'm guessing that when I read the definition, most of us thought of someone who's treated us this way, who mistreated us and then denied that they were mistreating us, denied that they lied, even when we're totally bringing the receipts, that kind of stuff. And on an interpersonal level, we might guess that people who gaslight are controlling or manipulating the people that they're gaslighting. But what if we go bigger? I mean, what we've been talking about is gaslighting on a much bigger scale. So let's look at inflation. So I want to start talking about the basics of inflation. I mean, generally speaking, inflation is how you measure how much is the cost of living or the consumer price index and how that increases, usually over a year. So, especially, for our discussion, I was interested in how economists think about what affects inflation. So, there's all kind of sort of dorky, wonky terms like monetary policy and supply and demand disruption, blah, blah. But the bottom line is there's a lot of variables, and there is a metric crap ton load of profit taking.
I love the technical term.
Yeah, it's wonky economic terms. Corporate profits in this what we're calling inflationary period are way disproportionate to almost any other time. And we're confusing profiteering with supply and demand issues because I think, Brian, you alluded to this before. We have monopolies. We have completely unregulated capitalism. And some media is starting to pay more attention to this. Like literally companies are setting records 2 years running for as long as there's been records. They're buying back stocks as hard as they can go. They're saying, oh, the pandemic, oh, supply chain, and they're raising their prices, even if they don't actually have supply chain issues, as an excuse to increase prices. And all that's, yeah, go.
Can I just point out that they're doing that in some rooms, but then in the rooms where they're gathering and they're talking to each other, they're patting themselves on the back and saying, look how we hoodwinked these people.
Right, because is it 90? It's about 90% of our media is now owned by 16 entities.
Yeah.
Which
that includes local news. Yes, all of it.
That's
Yeah.
every.
Yeah.
That's
So
everything.
the mainstream media is not going to report on that. Yeah.
Right. And we're to the place where, $1 million on Facebook advertising, you can destabilize a country. That's where we are.
Yeah. And all that stuff is awesome for top executives, right? Because they're making bank, but they increase racial and economic equality. And they leave companies less flexible if they have to pivot because they don't have so much cash. They just paid all their top execs and they've bought back a bunch of stock. So if anything changes in the economy, they don't have the cash to pivot. Literally, profits were up 35% last year. That is an astonishing rate for 1 year. And that's more than 3 times the average wage increases, which were already diverging. So any of this, but we had to pay more wages and that's why we had to drive up prices. No, no. They made 35%, wages went up on average 11%. Which of those numbers
Which
is
doesn't
bigger?
cover inflation.
Right.
Correct.
And the interesting thing that there's a great book called The Darwin Economy that goes and explains why corporations have to be those lean, mean, dividend generating machines right now. Because if they have a little fat on them, another company is going to buy them up and liquidate them for that and render that fat for their dividends.
Yeah, two figures that don't get as much attention about this that had such a big impact on it in terms of essentially the buying and stripping companies and so on. Obviously, that's a huge part of how Buffett made most of his money. Like that, he kind of perfected the art, the craft of that. But another person who doesn't get as much credit for how this current CEO a practice is currently being used of basically prioritizing short-term profits, even at in some cases long-term essentially destruction of the company, was Jack Welch from the 80s. So him being the CEO, and obviously a lot of it was before my time, so I had to go look and see. I didn't even know that GE used to be the most profitable company in the world. It's like, GE, the light bulb people? Like, really? And it's like, but through those practices, he was one of the first major pioneers of really getting to the point of, you know what? Like, yeah, we have this workforce, but like, let's cut it to like 20% of them. Forget even how that does for the impact of the long-term health of the company, which it actually wound up tanking their stock in the long run. But by then he was long gone. And obviously from that, you got the additional glorification of it with, like, for example, movies like Wall Street. Your character, Michael Douglas, the prestigious greed is good character, the kind of embodiment of Wall Street, is essentially the magnification or the I guess you can call it the romanticizing of that particular person, Jack Welch. And so now, ever since then, you've become that, but that has become the standard. That became, it's totally normal. Of course, like CEOs, and of course, like they're going to essentially reward the shareholders. And unfortunately, it seems like that's become a cancer to, I guess, the overall society of our country. The only place where we have accountability now is shareholders and CEOs. So shareholders can hold their CEOs accountable, but nobody else within society can hold people accountable.
And shareholders are this amount.
Yeah. That reminds me about, like, one of the reasons in my mind, one of the reasons why they say people idolize Donald Trump is because he has this way of being very willy-nilly and kind of defiant of and ruthless, quote, defiant of the rules and all of that jazz. And we're coming to see that he's been charged with these different things at this time. But in essence, though, the idolization of somebody who ruthlessly attacks business and makes no bones about the fact that they exploit tax loopholes and blah 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 was idolized by a lot of people, especially a lot of small to mid-sized business owners, and they influence a lot of people in a lot of towns.
And so, on some level, for a lot of us, it's something that we can really resonate with. Somebody who's being genuine, even though what they're doing is terrible. For a lot of people, especially in today's day and time, because we've gotten so used to being either lied to directly or having this kind of sugar-coated kind of perception of what people are saying. Like, it's very unlikely that you're going to see an interview where, for example, Bezos sits down and he actually tells you, no, I want to run all of commerce around the entire world. that's my goal. Like, it is what it is. He's not likely to say that. Whereas, even though that's his goal, a more Donald Trump type of person, he says, hey, it is what it is. That's how I feel. And people, unfortunately, they appreciate that. They're like, hey, I mean, hey, at least I know what I'm getting with this guy. And especially in a political sense, where previously we're so used to politicians telling us something and doing the exact opposite. And it's like, so a lot of people who follow his line of thought, they appreciate that about him, which kind of, unfortunately, ever since then, I think a lot of politicians, they haven't learned their lesson. They haven't learned the fact that it wasn't necessarily specifically the policies he had that made him resonate. It was the fact that, like, hey, this is somebody that I feel like, right or wrong, if I vote for him, he's going to do what he says he's going to do. That's how they felt. Whether that was correct, whether it was accurate, is a totally different situation. And so, unfortunately, I feel like less politicians have brought forward that same kind of personality, that same kind of connection ever since. It's not a coincidence that the two most popular politicians in our country are on one side Trump and Bernie. Like, they have nothing in common in terms of what they believe in, but it's not an accident that they're both incredibly popular.
Yeah.
There's also, because, so Brian, you sort of alluded to this, like, as corporations, as industries have consolidated more and more and more, it doesn't matter what consumers will or won't be willing to buy. They don't have any other choice. And so, like with Amazon, that completely defies the laws of business physics, because it is so big and it has bankrupted and co-opted so many businesses. It doesn't matter what it does to communities. It doesn't matter whether they're turning a profit. None of that is relevant. And they don't have to be, because he owns all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
it's actually really interesting. As I just found out from some investors that the reason why like Uber is still around, even though they haven't made a profit ever, is all those investors are keeping throwing their money in to the point where waiting for the time where autonomous driving comes into play. And then all the wages that all those drivers would make is now profit. And that's staggering.
Wow.
Well, it makes sense because obviously you can essentially kiss taxis goodbye. That's an entire industry you just don't even need anymore. It's already been hit aggressively by Ubers and Lyfts and stuff.
I
But that
wonder
would
how
be the
close we
final
are to
nail in the
that.
coffin.
I really wonder how close we are to that.
Okay.
I would say that
here's-
probably prior to AI, we probably were several, like maybe 10, 15 years away. But I think probably assistance by AI will probably shrink that down to quite a bit.
Well, here's a little longer time on that. Is I actually ate at an automated McDonald's 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
20.
Yeah.
And so I believe a lot of this has been held back just for the, because if all of a sudden everybody's unemployed, we're going to have riots in the streets.
And nobody's eating at a damn McDonald's.
Right? And so then they know how, bread and circus works. They've been around, people have studied this for quite some time, since the Romans. And so they have to do a slow rollout. And the pandemic definitely sped it up, but it's also because people are quietly quitting. And we need to do more of it, because if our whole economy is a shell game, there's a Ponzi scheme. And once you have a glitch, that all starts to fall apart.
Yeah, and our over reliance on debt has made it so that it's going to be essentially it's a house of cards. Like, there's nothing solid underneath, because we're just moving money around. We're trying to generate a small amount of profits, send that off to the shareholders. The rest of it is all debt, and then we just move it on to the next buck, to the next buck. But then, of course, you got these people within Congress who are arguing back and forth about the debt ceilings, and no one's coming to a solution of why do we keep getting in this situation? What is the permanent solution to this? It's just we'll argue about it enough until we get to the next election. Then we'll bring up some random hot topic that everybody can be distracted by for the next 2.5 years, and then we'll just do this cycle all over again.
Outrage porn.
Yeah.
Well, especially as we... Oh, go ahead, Nick.
Oh, no. Sorry, Brian. Yeah, no, we're not looking at a labor shortage, right? We're looking at a shortage of good jobs, of quality jobs. There are people that want to work, that need to work, and the problem is when you have these, corporate overlords making decisions that impact all of us and hurt us and hurt us as a people, as a society. They're actually further, exacerbating this division that we have, and just into the precarity that most of us in this country are facing. They are just wanting to extract whatever profit that they can get, and then that's good enough for them. And it's happened, right? We talked about Welsh, just recently here. So that has happened in retail. That's happening in e-commerce. It's just expanded as time has gone on, has progressed, and then with AI entering into the big picture, it's just going to grow by leaps and bounds. And as a result of COVID, people having the opportunity to think about where they are in life and where they want to be, they are not they're not settling for just whatever. They want something better for life. They want to have wages so that they can live. They can not just survive, but thrive and prosper. But I feel like, we were just recently talking about Trump, and Bernie Sanders, right? So I feel that there's a mythology that we tell ourselves here in the United States. So you have Bernie that as going in populist direction, speaking to all of the ills and all of the things that irk Americans, right? And really speaking to that and feeding that. And then Trump is feeding this myth of, hey, it's still the America of the 1980s, and he personifies that in so many ways. It's like you're putting up a relic of that time. And you're trying to say, hey, this is the economy right now in our time in the 2020s, and it doesn't
Even
make
for
any
his
sense.
penchant for gold toilets.
Yes, exactly. It's so gaudy.
Yeah,
It doesn't make any sense, right?
yeah.
All that
It's
glitters is not gold. It includes hair. Just kidding.
it's like they both speak to people who know that something is wrong, but one of them is pointing like, "Hey, let's go back to an earlier time." The other one's pointing like, "Let's go to the future." And obviously, both they're
Yeah.
speaking to different aims, but they both are addressing people who know that there's an issue, something is wrong here.
Right? We all want more equity and more wealth and more ability to enjoy, you know, this world, good health, education, housing, and all those things. And so both sides want the same things. They're just being told to go at it from two different directions.
Yeah.
It's
Because we
been
all
interesting.
want prosperity for all.
Sure. It's been interesting to me, this whole like, this is unprecedented. I can't get anybody to work. Because literally, like, since newspapers have existed, there have been op-eds about how nobody wants to work anymore. And really, and so at some point, like employers have to make some concessions, maybe add a benefit or increase wages a little bit, decrease work hours. But literally, since newspapers have existed, people gripe like, nobody wants to work. What is it with this generation? They have no work ethic. Well, actually, they just don't have an ethic for working and being treated badly.
Yeah. 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 It's insane, and I just want people, I'm proud of the union rising right now. I'm super proud of it. I keep reading more and more about it. And I'm also disappointed in Biden for not supporting unions more. Um, I don't know what else to say there other than
Well,
I'm,
because
I
okay,
just,
so if I can, is the last
yeah,
time we were
totally.
in here in this situation at end stage capitalism, we all learned it in elementary school as the Gilded Age with the robber
Yeah.
barons. And
Yeah.
the only thing that stopped that from continuing to, and being able to sell ourselves into slavery just to stay alive was that unions started to form.
Yeah.
And unions took that check and balance system from corporate power to people power and made a check and balance, just like our government system, is we have the House,
But who gave
legislature.
them
It's the same thing.
who
But
gave
we
them the
need,
footing to do that? Because there wasn't laws that protected them until that happened.
well, right now we're in the place where Reagan already pulled all the teeth, and so we're having to do it again without the legal protection, but we
Yeah.
have to band together as people and
Yeah.
unionize as Americans.
Yeah.
Because
So-
as the richest country in the Western world, we are the most exploited. We are the most productive, we have the least amount of time off, and we have the lowest life expectancy.
Well,
And
and
this relates back to the gaslighting, because like we're told actually we're the luckiest workers, we're the ones who are making this a problem, and this is the gaslighting on a larger scale. But we've seen what happens when businesses prioritize treating employees well. They have a steady pool of awesome talent. Their staff has better personal lives, they're physically healthier, their company makes money. They still make bank, but everybody gets better. And so this is why all this matters. When we get repeatedly lied to from multiple sources, from businesses, from politicians, from media, a few things happen. One is that some people believe the lies. Some people compare their lies to the rhetoric they're hearing, and it makes them feel crazy. The economy's doing great. Well, I'm not doing great. So either I'm crazy or it's my personal fault that my life is hard. Or they get mad at anyone who isn't struggling like them. But one of the hardest things about gaslighting is it usually leaves the target feeling unsure of their minds and confused, which makes it really hard for them to take an active role in remedying the situation.
Right, because they don't even trust their own senses anymore, or their own perceptions. Is because they've been devalued, rewarded for correct observations. So yeah.
And
So
it's
Leslie,
it's
what you
crazy
touched
making.
on-
It really is. Like I experienced that in one of my previous jobs, and it's like you're speaking to a wall that wants to hit you. Like you're like I'm talking to you, but you like somehow this wall is going like this to me. Not even that you're doing this, but like the wall is like it's
Yeah. It's like when somebody's, when your next door neighbor doesn't like you playing your music too loud and they knock on the wall and you yell at them, "Go around. There is not a doorknob."
Yes.
Well,
Oh
Leslie, what you
man.
touched
Oh
on made
man.
me think of something as basic as the federal poverty line. We know it's a bogus number. The formula hasn't been updated since 1963. That's a long time. So
Yikes.
there are people who live above the poverty line, but they still can't afford to live in this country, in the United States, or anywhere, in this country. And prices continue to rise. So in 2021, the wage a person would need to they would need a job that pays them $20.40 to afford a one-bedroom apartment for 30% of their income. And we have any documents or data like this: the minimum wage workers can't afford rent anywhere in America, and that's from 2021. The poverty line says someone who makes 22K for herself and her kids is not poor. That's what the standard is, and benefits are tied to the poverty line. So any income above the cut off makes people lose benefits, even though they are still technically poor.
Well, and this
Yeah,
is where
data can be tricky. And it gets manipulated and it gets portrayed in a certain way. You really have to always dive into how the data is created before you understand what it's actually saying.
Right. So the real problem that I see with the means testing is kind of what we alluded to earlier, is if I'm making under $22,000 a year and I get assistance, so I get, about $8,000 to $1,000 a month in child care assistance as well. And, food and all that. So then I can actually live at, like I'm almost to the point where I'm living at 35, almost $40,000 lifestyle because of all the supplements and the childcare assistance. But the moment I tried to get myself to get a little better, to get up in this world, to make a little profit, maybe work a side hustle. The moment
Or
I
get a
work,
raise, or just get a raise for
right,
doing a good job
right,
at work.
yeah, I get an extra dollar. All those benefits, so $10,000 to $15,000 in yearly benefits, goes away for that $1 of trying to get ahead. And
Yeah.
that's exactly whack-a-mole. Of when
Yeah.
you try to get up, you shut them down. It reminds me of what great Gary Kirsten cartoon about where two pyramid workers, were talking to each other, and one says to the other one, "If I work hard enough on this pyramid, one day I can afford my own." And it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And this is like, seriously, this is all by design.
Oh yeah, as in the book The Wealth of Nations, unregulated capitalism needs a slave class to exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, y'all, I'm mindful of the time. I'm wondering if it makes sense to wrap up for this part of our conversation. So, why don't we each go around and just have some closing thoughts for each of us? Nick.
I would say that this kind of discussion is one that we need to continue having. It's not just one conversation. We need to bring these issues, to the forefront, and also, talk about the solutions, to this, because it's been going on for a long time. We've been a gaslit society for decades. So it's going to take a long time for us to heal as a people, as a country. But we got to start somewhere. So I think having these kinds of conversations, looking at the data, and really seeing where we are, instead of continuing to hold on to a myth, is the best way forward, the best way to go. Because the way that we can start our recovery is to realize, hey, there is a problem, but every problem contains its solution. So that's why we're here.
Kimberly?
Well, I mean, I just want to say that there's a lot of data out there that points towards things not going in the right direction. And as Nick said, there's a lot of solutions out there that we can lean on to get us out of this space that we are in. And I'm just eager for people to start participating in that. And I know that it's already starting. There's more and more people getting involved in different spaces that are making a difference. So, I'm excited just to talk more about the data and how it's collected, and what we can do with what it's saying, as to how it can direct us towards solutions, right? So, and help people get involved in those solutions. So yeah, I'm excited. Even though I'm also like scared and frustrated and all of that, but ultimately we went over some really great things today. I think the biggest point that I think we kind of basically just covered here at the end, but we kind of alluded to throughout this entire conversation, and talked about before, but we brought the numbers down, is that basically nobody in this country can live on $22K a year, and they're saying that if you make a little more than that, then you're all good. So it's we've got to advocate for something better. So yeah, let's do it.
Rocky.
It's been a great, fruitful conversation.
There you are. Good.
Am I on now? Okay. It's been a very fruitful conversation with you guys, and I just can only kind of ditto and second the previous points that like Nick and Kimberly have already made. There's definitely some concerning things on the horizon, but definitely don't feel like it's necessarily doom and gloom. There are options, and having a sense of, I'm not sure if I'm necessarily one who believes in hope. I believe more in there are options, we have plans, and I think it's just a matter of us taking control back of our own lives. We can't, obviously, it's been proven time and time again that we can't necessarily rely on other external factors and other people to have our own best interests and our own, I guess, to work in our own best interest. And so we have to really kind of take some control back, and obviously it's hard. A lot of us are struggling to just kind of keep the lights on and pay the bills. But if you can find that one specific thing within your particular life, in your own community, that you're like, hey, I want this to change, reach out to one person and kind of take that one baby step today, and then obviously take an additional step tomorrow and the day after that to try to see that becoming something that you can see some improvement on. And I think if enough of us do that consistently over time, we'll start to see more of our overall lives changing, because we didn't get here overnight. This is something that the forces that got us to this place, it took them a solid amount of decades and influence and resources to get to that particular point. So we have to kind of do our little bit to start shifting that wheel back into our own independent direction, so that we can see a promising future instead of hopefully thinking that the best of times are behind us. So I'm here in this fight with you guys to go ahead and continue making progress. And if you don't know who to reach out to, feel free to reach out to any of our social medias, or you'll see us. If you search any of our names on social media, you'll find us pretty quickly.
Awesome. Brian?
Yes, my takeaway on this is to look up and research more on your own time about ranked choice voting and universal basic incomes, and imagine how those can work for you and help us to solve a lot of issues. They are not silver bullets by any means, but they are ways that we can take our American power and a democracy back. And thank you.
I think one thing that I'd just like to say that I've been thinking of is, so I study and teach Aikido, and the idea of Aikido is that it's much easier to redirect something that's already in motion. Well, buddy, things are in motion. Things are in all kind of motion. So we are actually at a really excellent place in history to shift the trajectory of things, because things are in motion, and that makes me hopeful. Okay, so that's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us for Futurocracy. Our topic is, what is safety in a gaslighting society? As I mentioned before, you can find the links to all the data we talked about today in the data link in the description, as well as a link to our homepage. We plan to have data-grounded convos at least once a month. We hope to get to know and connect with you, and to build a community of folks who want to have meaningful solutions-based conversations. We have a lot of ideas how to connect with all of you, and we're super excited for the topics to come.
And please join us on social media, on Twitter and Instagram. Links are in the description. So thank you so much for joining us today. And please, we hope that the time you spent with us provides fuel for thought and for further discussions here at Futurocracy and within your own circles. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button.
That's
Take
right.
good care.
Because she's adorable. You want to see more of this one.
Yes, Aurora.
Who's calling your name? Bye.